speaking on the issues that impact. This is the Patrick Henningsen Show on TNT Radio.
All right, folks, welcome back. We're in hour number 2 of this live broadcast, final segment of the final hour, and we have managed to connect our guest. He is a political commentator. He's also a fairly adept historian to boot as well. Looking forward to talking to Ryan Dawson, connecting live from the Far East right now. Ryan, thank you for joining us on TNT this week.
Thanks for having me. Glad we could do this.
Now, Ryan, I wanted to get straight into it. I've seen your commentary on X, Twitter, and I want to get, first of all, to the United States. The whole political farrago with this campus protest, the reaction to it by the press, by the White House, by Senate, by the House, the anti-Semitism bill. Have you ever seen a whirlwind dervish like this before? And as somebody who used to live in the vicinity of Ground Zero, the Beltway as well, you can kind of get into the psychology of where is the United States political class at the moment. I mean, this is extreme by all past standards of reactions. Your thoughts on this, Ryan?
It's a giant overreaction. Had they just waited a couple of weeks, school was out and it would have been done with. Now they have people on film leaving graduations. Usually what happens is the system, the government understands that college kids have a lot of energy and a lot of time and a rather large moral social compass. And so they manufacture and spoon feed them nonsense social issues. So you can go to any college kid and they'll tell you every detail about 17th century slavery, some issue that's already been resolved. It's important to know, but it's not the issue, the moral issue of the day. So, for example, they may know all about that, but then slavery was great again in North Africa after the invasion of Libya, where people were being sold for $400. Well, that got brushed aside. It's not exciting because they want to focus on things that have already been done or some other non-issue like what is a woman or BLM or any of these sort of nonsense things to redirect all that well-meaning good energy just barking up the wrong tree. Well, they finally found the right tree. They started going after the genocidal practices of Israel, which have been going on for decades. It's just since October 7th that the camera has really been on, because we just saw day after day after day of babies being pulled out of rubble. And then there was recently a mass grave where children had been hogtied, zip-tied, and just assassinated and thrown in a ditch. You can't really claim you're going after Hamas when you're assassinating kids that you've up close hogtied or handcuffed. And so there's a lot of moral outrage about a current issue for once, and a real issue, real racism for once, not historic racism, stuff that's happening today with people who I call them God's chosen lunatics that think that the Lord is a real estate agent and just awards you someone else's living room. After all this is said and done, there's no way the settlements in the West Bank can continue. Those all have to be removed. It's a preposterous thing for it to have gone on for this long. But the state overreacting and arresting college kids, because they ignored them when they're talking about nothing. You can compare this to like Black Lives Matter and St. Fentanyl, where they're all taking a knee. The police are taking a knee as college kids and college age kids who may or may not have been in college completely jumped out and burned cities. They annexed a part of Seattle for a summer because that's not a threat to the system. So it was a threat to people's personal property. It was a threat to the stores they're looting, but the government doesn't care about you. But they care about Israel because Israel pays them. AIPAC gives them a lot of money. So enormous amounts of money and a little bit more than money. It's a little bit more than just bribes. There's a dirty side to bribery called blackmail. They get into that as well. So that is why the cops came in and started getting violent and cracking heads. Like, oh, you're talking about the paymaster? Well, now we're going to bring up this canard of anti-Semitism. And let's be super clear. None of these kids are protesting Jews. They're protesting the behavior of a state that calls itself the Jewish state, but that doesn't make it so. They don't care about someone's religion or not. They care about them bombing people's apartments, while the families are still there and have nowhere to go. And the Congress knows this. They can sit there and pontificate and wave their finger at people and go, "Oh, Israel, you just hate the Jews." Da, da, da. They know what Israel's doing. They sent them the bombs. They know they're bombing people in their apartments. They know they're bombing hospitals over and over again, and churches, mosques, playgrounds with people on them. You name it. You pick a war crime, it's been done, and the U.S. has paid for it. The U.S. has assisted them with weapons. And that's what these kids are protesting, is the actions of the state. And to call that anti-Semitic is as ridiculous as if I oppose North Korea, it means I hate Koreans. They're like, it's not because of their Koreanness that's the problem. It's the dictatorship that's the problem.
And I asked this question to a lot of people, and I want to get your answer to this as well, Ryan. This isn't a new issue, and the corruption surrounding this, the Israeli lobby. But in the past, U.S. leadership have been forced to kind of intervene to put pressure on Israel to apply the brakes to past, sort of bombing operations, slaughters, and so forth, incursions. Nothing pretty much has happened in 7 months. It's been weapons free, hands off. What has changed from now compared to the past, where even Ronald Reagan or George Bush Sr. or George W. Bush, Obama, other people have kind of moved to put pressure on Tel Aviv? Nothing in 7 months, until really the last couple of weeks, and then it's just lip service. How are things? What mechanism has changed? What structurally has changed, Ryan?
Russia has its hands full. In the past, there was always a little bit of a threat to American hegemony militarily, whereas that would not have happened with Putin in charge without the war in Ukraine. That would not have flown. And in the past, we saw that with both of the Iraq wars. Russia went against it. During the second Iraq war, so did France and a lot of other states. They said, we're not going to be part of this. During the invasion of Libya, Putin wasn't in charge. And so Obama did do that, and that was equally as horrible. There have been other things, though, the starvation of Yemen, the sanctions placed all over North Africa. There's things, but there is some pressure opposed to those, even though the media ignores them. But the level of sustained destruction that Israel has done, the U.S., there was a chance early on for a ceasefire that the UN unanimously voted to do, and the U.S., of course, being on the Security Council, voted no. And the American public was not aware that had happened unless they got their news from Twitter or Telegram, because it wasn't on TV, and it never is. So I think that's the other big key element, is the public is finally seeing this, not you and me, but a lot of the 9-to-5ers that don't have time to listen to every political show. They made it easy. You could get it on Twitter. Oh, look, there's a bunch of children with no legs, or what awful things that have been coming. That would have been censored in the past as gore, even though the truth of the matter of war is far more important than, oh, that was disturbing to see. You need to be able to see things, and you need to be able to report things. And with Twitter being open, that allowed Substack and Rumble and other alternative media to get news faster and get it out there. And the outrage was always there. Americans aren't psychopaths. They're ignorant, and they're ignorant because their mass media is completely controlled. It's always been a Zionist media. There's some little nitwit on this show that I wasn't allowed to speak on the other day. It's a little blue-haired weirdo acting like, the media is not controlled. And I would have asked, really, how many Palestinians were murdered last year before October 7th? There's no way they know. There's 237 people were murdered. None of it was ever reported on U.S. media. And now I would like anybody to sit there with a straight face and tell me if 237 Jews had been murdered, that none of it would have been reported on American media. And I mean, just, you know what they do. They just shoot them. Snipers will kill all manner of ways of killing people in the West Bank and Gaza. None of it was reported. None of the home demolitions, the land annexation, it's not on TV. They won't even call them settlements. They call them Jewish neighborhoods. It's completely biased. And so the monopoly they had over media was broken by Elon Musk. Not that he set out to do this, not that he's a champion of Palestine, because he isn't, but because he believes in free speech. And if you allow free speech, these kind of things will happen automatically. I think people will start to learn. Not my day. Sorry, I have a 3-year-old just entered the room.
Okay, yeah, I saw you got you got an incursion into your studio. Incursion into your
I
studio.
Thought that was locked. He's cute. I just try to keep my kids off the web because what I do, what you do too. It's very taboo. Oh, you're against carpet bombing homes? Well, you dirty, awful Nazi, whatever. I get called both a Nazi and a Zionist, depending on who's hating on me on the day. But it's ridiculous. These are very simple moral precepts, I think. Quit killing people. Quit killing civilians. And that that it's you really get targeted and defamed, dragged through the mud, just slandered, libeled for taking these positions, which lets you know who's in charge. And that was another thing that happened on Twitter. Of course, I wasn't on there the last 9 years or something. I finally got returned, but I don't even know how many years. A long time. I just quit even bothering with it. But like, you couldn't. Not only you couldn't report things, but people could slander you and say whatever they wanted about you, and you weren't allowed to be there to even defend yourself. And so a little bit of that's going away. Others are even, there are some people with some deplorable positions that have been brought back, but hey, that's all free speech, and you can't start drawing lines, or it's a slippery slope. If they're not breaking the law, they should be allowed to speak. That's the way our forefathers set it up.
Speaking of pejoratives that have lost their sting, what about the anti-Semitic charge? Have they really pushed it over the edge with this latest legislative effort in the United States? And what do you see for the future of this particular weapon that's often used against critics?
Yeah, it has. I like how you called it a weapon, because they have weaponized this charge to just. This hate speech is just whoever they hate. And it's not that there aren't any anti-Semitic people, that does still exist. There are people who generally hate Jews for being Jewish and assign or ascribe a kind of genetic teleology to them. There are some people like that. There's so few, their names though. But let's be honest, 99% of the time when something's called anti-Semitic, it's just because it's in some way in opposition to Israel, the state, which is not biological. And they just say that to silence somebody, be like, oh, you like Hitler. Because the first place a person's mind goes to when they hear the word is the gas chambers. So like, no, we're just saying you can't take a bulldozer and run over Rachel Corrie to try to protect the home that you were going to demolish, that they now have. That was in Rafah, by the way, and they have now demolished those homes this year. I remember getting a letter from
tragic.
So many people have suffered under this awful regime, and that canard has worked. A lot of people who know better are afraid to say anything because someone's going to call them racist. Someone's going to call them anti-Semitic. They're like, well, why do you care if someone calls you names? They're like, well, because being called names gets you fired from your job or thrown out of university or debanked and kicked off social media. Based on accusation alone, you will lose YouTube, Meta, name it, Discord, all that stuff, PayPal. They will kick you off. All someone has to do is accuse you of anti-Semitism and you're out. And then you're stuck in a position of having to prove a negative, prove you aren't something. And it's really a dishonest discourse because they know you're not anti-Semitic. It's just a pretext to shut down speech that doesn't promote policies that are making billions of dollars for the military industrial complex, that are serving Zionists in, that have well organized professional lobbies, professional legal bribery, you could call it. And so they want to shut it down. That accusation now, unfortunately, some genuine anti-Semites are now like, hooray, because the word doesn't mean anything anymore. But it's probably doing more good than harm, because it was used far more often for censorship than it was to go after anything serious. There really isn't any sort of serious populist movement of actual anti-Semitism. That's been dead for since World War II. And I'll tell you, those who are anti-Semitic usually are that way because of Israel's behavior, which they can't delineate as being part of a state. They think it's part of an ethnic group.
Yeah, that's another problem with that dissecting that whole argument as well. I would like to analyze that on a future date properly, because it's very interesting. But we got a couple minutes left. Ryan, I want to get your comment on this clip. This is a U.S. senator who I don't have to introduce. You know who it is when you see it. And I want to get your reaction to just the unhinged nature that we're seeing in public now from a lot of politicians and people like this, celebrities, and everybody's going off the rails. It's quite incredible. Let's roll this. This is Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina on a recent media. Go ahead.
Historians would say, why is it okay for Reagan to do it and not President Biden? But let me ask you about
why is it okay? Well, can I say this? Why is it okay for America to drop 2 nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to end their existential threat war? Why was it okay for us to do that? I thought it was okay. To Israel, do whatever you have to do to survive as a Jewish state.
Senator, again, military officials say the technology has changed. But let me ask you about how
these military officials that you're talking about
let me ask you something.
Full of crap.
Let me ask you something that
Well, even by Lindsey Graham standards, totally off the rails, Ryan. What's going on? Is the cognitive dissonance dam breaking here, or what?
Miss Lindsey will just say, cuts fried chicken with a fork. That guy is completely compromised. You know what he's hiding in his closet. It's got its own zip code. He's so deep in the closet he can see Narnia in his rearview mirror. But Lindsey Graham is a hardcore hawk, and first of all, it was not okay to nuke Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but at least they had an argument of Japan declared war on the United States when they bombed a base in Hawaii. Hawaii was not a state at that time, but there was U.S. property there, military property that was hit because the U.S. put an oil embargo on Japan first. But they were at war, and I could say, well, what's the difference between using a nuke or just using a whole bunch of little bombs? Well, the difference is, first of all, you shouldn't firebomb a city with a bunch of little bombs either. But the difference is the radiation in the wake and the instantaneous death, and the fact that Nagasaki wasn't even a target. Well, I can get into that anyway. They should not have nuked Japan. They had elected a new government in April for the sole purpose of surrendering to the Americans. They ended up the exact same terms they'd offered, saying, leave the emperor alone. That's what they accepted after the bombings. It wasn't about saving lives or any of that mess. It was about flexing on the Soviet Union to say, look at our new toy, and we're willing to blow up civilians and we can get away with it because we're now the superpower since Europe has destroyed itself. You should never use a nuclear weapon on civilian populations. And you might want to really rethink that, given that there are nuclear exercises right now in Russia, should NATO really intervene in Ukraine, about whether or not it's okay if a state feels like it's threatened enough to just nuke cities. You cannot just nuke God. You can't just blow up a whole city full of people. And they're not under threat. The U.S. wasn't under threat then in World War II, and Israel's existence is not being threatened. In fact, nuking Gaza would threaten the existence of Israel because the entire world community would have enough of it. if they killed that many civilians instantaneously, all world trade would be cut off from Israel except from the United States, and they wouldn't survive. So neither one of them would survive if they were to just use a nuke or Moab or something. In fact, it's not clear if they're going to survive what they've already done. It seems like there is going to be a Palestinian state, which was not even one of Hamas's demands for a ceasefire. The whole rest of the world is demanding it for them. There has to be a viable state, and that's all of Palestine, West Bank included, that should be allowed to have a seaport, an airport. Right of return is something that could go on the table. Why can't Palestinians return to the Levant? Israelis, Jews can, but not if you're not of the right ethnic religious category. You don't get to go back to the land your parents and grandparents and great-great-grandparents were born in with continuity. With somebody from Brooklyn with no ties to the land other than rhetoric of maybe 3,000 years ago or something, they get to just move into someone else's living room. Can I, as a Native American, say, well, 20,000 years ago, probably one of my ancestors crossed it from the Bering Strait, so now I can go to Siberia and just take somebody's house or someone's house in America or Canada? No, it doesn't work that way. And that's based on actual history, not mythology. It's like some of these trans Semites try to claim. It's unbelievable. It's just, I could just kill people because this land is supposed to go to us. That is the kind of idiotic rationalization of why the land is theirs, regardless of how many people are actually living on it with private property. They have this mythical rationalization of no. See, we're just returning here after thousands of years, but all this stuff belongs to us. You need to get out. You're of the wrong ethnic group.
Yeah, the story itself is breathtaking, how it's been allowed to kind of persist for so long. But I think the facade is really coming down right now. A lot of the propaganda is disintegrating before our eyes. There's a global awakening. We'll talk more about this hopefully in the future. But Ryan Dawson, the ANC Report, thank you very much for joining us on TNT this week.
Anytime.
There he goes, ladies and gentlemen. Ryan Dawson. Follow him on X, Twitter, and his other social media feeds and video channels as well. And a big thank you to Dr. Frank Romano on the ground in Istanbul with the Freedom Flotilla in hour number 1. I'm Patrick Henningsen, your host, folks. It's been great. Stay tuned. Stay on the network, though. State of the Nation coming right up. Today's News Talk TNT signing out. Take care, you guys. We'll see you next time.